You need to set the tone of safety in conversation about this topic and say that from this day on, we are going to be committed to trying to keep you, our talented workforce, with an understanding that we're going to work together to find the accommodations you need. We want loyalty and commitment because we know you have that to your family, but we know you have it to your workplace as well.
Did you know that in 2020, there were 53 million caregivers in the United States? And by 2025, this number is expected to grow to 62.5 million. 73% of these caregivers also have a job. They are called working caregivers, and they are invisible because they don't talk about their caregiving challenges. Working Caregivers, the Invisible Employees, is a podcast that will show you how to support working caregivers. Join Selma Archer and Zach Demopoulos on the Working Caregivers, the Invisible Employees podcast as they show you how to support working caregivers.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Selma.
Hey, partner.
How you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm very excited. We got an incredible guest today. And as you know, our show is all about highlighting amazing people that are making an impact in the care economy, meaning people who are having to be caregivers and care, whether it's an adult child with disabilities or whether it's an elderly person. And there's no greater caregiver advocate that I know in North America. Now, I say North America because that includes Canada, and it's Donna Thomson. Hey, Donna, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here in your inaugural podcast. Fantastic.
We are honored as well. We really are. Just briefly, you'll be able to learn a lot more about Donna in our show notes, but just briefly, I took this right off your LinkedIn, Donna. I love it. You're a caregiver, an educator. You're passionate about caregiver training and research engagement. And you're an author. You're actually an author of two books that I know of. One, The Four Walls of Freedom, which is amazing. You wrote after having a son with cerebral palsy, Nicholas, and what that entailed and having to leave your career and being a full-time caregiver. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the second book, which is really the focus of what we want to do, and that is The Unexpected Journey of Caring. You and Dr. Zachary White wrote that together. So we're looking forward to talking a little bit about that. Before we do that, though, I like to always just throw out to our guests, you're from Ottawa, Canada, which I don't know, most people know that, but it's the capital of Canada. Share something interesting that our audience would like to know about Ottawa when they visit someday.
Well, as you said, it's the capital of the country. It's not a very big city, but it is right on the border of Quebec. And so it's a bilingual city. It's also, it's because it's a government town. It's a little bit like Washington, D.C. And some people have called it the city that fun forgot. And, but those of us who live here might dispute that. It's a lot better than it used to be as far as nightlife goes. And there's a huge blues festival going on right now. And our son is a music lover. And he goes with his nurses to Blues Fest, and he saw Nickelback the other night and Maroon 5. So he's having a good time.
Awesome. Awesome. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. The fun city. You make it fun, I'm sure. You and your family make it fun. Yeah. Well, again, thank you for being here, Donna. Let's get right to our first question, and that is about your book, The Unexpected Journey of Caring. The transformation from loved one to caregiver. Now, Selma and I, as you know, are both caregivers. And I like the word unexpected because I was drafted into a caregiver like in a 2-minute phone call when my brother called me to tell me my father had a stroke. So this really appealed to me. And I found that though it looks like a textbook on caregiving, it really is an excellent read for somebody who is either going to become a caregiver, is a caregiver, or someone that might be managing a caregiver, supporting a caregiver. Can you tell us a little bit about what was the goal behind writing this book? How did it become such an amazing book?
Well, the story is that Dr. Zachary White, is a professor of care communications. And at the time that we wrote this book, he was working at Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was familiar with his blog, which is called The Unprepared Caregiver. And I was intrigued by what he was writing. He was writing about personal transformation that occurs, how your values change when you become a caregiver, how you become intolerant of other people and their lives. Sometimes, after a year or two of caregiving, we look in the mirror and we almost don't recognize ourselves. And so I was intrigued by the authenticity and the originality of what he was writing about, which seemed to me to be so deep and deeply personal, and about that personal transformation. So I got in touch with him and I said, I just want to have a conversation with you. Well, we began talking. He explored my work, and we thought maybe there's a combination of our work that could be interesting. Is there a link between what I normally write about, which has more to do with the practical advocating for navigating complex healthcare systems, how to thrive in a life when you cannot leave home and you're really bound to a person with very high needs? That's been my experience. And Zach, my father had 3 strokes too when I was a teenager. And I also looked after, with my sister, our mother, who had dementia for about the last 10 years of her life. And she died in 2018 at the age of 96. So lots of caregiving in our family and certainly in my life. And I was very interested in exploring the meaning of a life that is devoted to the care of others. How do we value that? And most of all, how does it profoundly change us? We cannot go back to the person we were before we began caregiving. So Zachary and I started talking, and we wrote this book without ever meeting each other in person. We only met after the book was already published, and my husband and I were going down for the month of March to Fripp Island, South Carolina, where we were going to get away from the winter here in Canada. And we dropped in on Zachary and his family, and we hugged each other and just said, oh, you're shorter, you're taller than I thought you were, But there we are, and we did find, I think, an important link between care communications. How do you find words to describe the most complicated, ambivalent feelings where I'm feeling desperation and joy at the same time, and these very complex experiences? And what Zachary is so good at is putting words and giving people the words to express what they're going through. And then I thought, well, if you have that language, then what can you do with it?
Mhm.
Where can you go to find help? What are the building blocks of, I'll use an overworked word, but what are the building blocks of resilience in this role? How can you stay in it over the long term and not die from stress and overwhelm? So that was the purpose of the book, really. And then to help people understand, who am I now? And what can I do with what I have in my life?
It's not easy. Like I said, someone I've been in these roles, it's not easy going from everything's kind of in a compartment. Okay, I have a job, then I come home and I have children and a spouse, and then I have a weekend. I can go play with some friends, and then all of a sudden the blurring of lines just all of a sudden hits you with. If I go home, my person I'm caring for is there, so it's that doesn't change. That doesn't have a compartment. That's part of your life, whether you're sitting in a meeting or what have you. And you talk a little bit about that. One of my favorite parts of your book is in chapter 5. You've got some amazing questions in there. If I could just share a couple, and maybe you can just tell me a little bit more about what you and Dr. White were thinking by posing this. But these are some great questions, whether you're on a journey or not, right? Or you're going to be on one. But how flexible is my supervisor? Do I need to change jobs? Can I even keep my job? Can I get home on lunch break to make sure everything is okay? Uh, and I love this one. This is so common, whether you're on a Zoom call or in a conference call. Will anyone notice if I'm checking my phone during meetings and subtly sending texts? Yeah, what was the purpose of you throwing these questions in here, and what do you want someone to walk away with on that?
Many people are in workplaces that are not caregiver friendly. There is simply no acknowledgement that many employees do have these responsibilities that bleed into the working day by love and necessity. And many people with either episodic symptoms or progressive disease are going to need to be checked on frequently. And we don't want to cut off communication between someone who may need us. Uh, well, Zach, your father had a stroke, and Selma, you're a caregiver as well. So we all know that how many times a day do we call our loved one, call home, or call a relative, and could you check on mom? Something like that. So I was hoping, because I wrote that chapter, I was hoping in writing that people would, even if they didn't have a caregiver friendly workplace, they would be able to have a reflective process that where someone could ask themselves, what would truly be helpful in easing my stress at work and helping me keep my employment. So these would be questions to say, yes, that question about checking my phone, that is very important to me. So if you know that, then that's the first step to having a conversation with your HR manager or your director to say, I am a family caregiver. I also love my job, want to keep my job, but there are a few accommodations that would really be very helpful to me. Can we begin to have a conversation about that? And another one that I was talking to a working caregiver the other day, and she said, the only place to cry is the ladies' room or the bathroom. And, I just thought, okay, well, not every workplace is going to have a private space, but, but maybe people could begin to shift their thinking around what is helpful, truly helpful, a parking place that's close to the entrance.
Wow.
These are simple things that you don't know that you need them until you're running a long distance to get to your vehicle in an emergency, or you've got to visit home over the lunch hour and come back in a hurry. So, we were trying to have a an anticipatory think about what kind of help is helpful for working caregivers.
Donna, when I first saw your book, the word unexpected, it really jumped out for me. And not just because caregiving can certainly be, and most often is, an unexpected journey. As Zach said, he was drafted into it. For me, it took a period of years, but I still didn't expect it. I thought my mom would continue to be self-sufficient and be able to take care of herself and live alone and all that. We just don't think about it until it happens to us. It's also unexpected in the way that you don't expect to be in all of these different roles. I basically became her nurse, administering injections and doing all kinds of medical procedures for her and her ailments. So you really just don't expect a lot of the things that you end up doing for that individual. But keeping on track with another question, I was wondering from a different perspective, the caregiver perspective, let's look at the employer, the business leader, the business manager, that's HR supervisor who has that employee who they're checking on every day, or they're trying to get to that car to get to the emergency situation at home. What would be one thing that you would want those individuals in our audience who are the business leaders and the managers to walk away with after reading your book or looking at some of the work that you've done in this area? What would be the one thing you would say to those individuals?
I would say that it's no, caregiving and work is not it's not an either or. You can
Yes.
do both. And what you need, though, is flexibility and an acknowledgement of the worth of both of those roles so that both roles can be honored and preserved and supported. In the old days, women in the workplace, if they got pregnant, they were automatically fired because, you know, caregiving and even motherhood, but caregiving and work were mutually exclusive. You do not mix one with the other. Today, in today's world, in an aging society with a shrinking workforce because of demographics, we have some of our most talented, most experienced workforce who are between the age of 45 and 65 at the height of their career, taking up caregiving roles. We do, businesses can't, there's an economic argument to be made to create caregiver-friendly workplaces, and it can be done. And in fact, there is some research to show that it is more profitable to support people because otherwise, what's the alternative? You're losing. You cannot retain, you cannot attract people who are very talented to your business needs, but because they are family caregivers. This is going to be the number one business perk and public policy issue of the next 20 years, I think.
You've got so many resources out there. It's complicated. It's overwhelming. You got an amazing blog called The Caregiver's Living Room, which is amazing. I just went on it this morning, and you've got great resources in there and conferences that go on. There is work that you're doing with the Canadian Center for Caregiving Excellence. There's work you've done that employers could actually participate in with McMaster Continuing Education. What's some advice you would give? Let's just take it, not the caregiver. Let's take it from a manager who maybe sees this podcast or any podcast talking about caregiving, and they're like, I need to take a couple of steps forward so I could be better. I could be more empathetic. I could be more compassionate, because it's not easy, right? At the end of the day, many caregivers aren't self-identifying. Selma said it took her years before she even realized that she is a caregiver.
Yes.
What's one or two steps that you would suggest to a manager, to a leader, to an HR person as to how get acquainted with this kind of work so that you can be more empathetic, more compassionate, more supportive?
Well, the first thing I would say is to read the book that you both have just written. It is a wonderful book.
That's a shameless plug.
It's true. It's true. I think sometimes when we are fearful of doing something that might compromise our standing at work. And
Yeah.
this is something we've often, almost approached caregiving at work as something to be ashamed of, that it's going to harm our reputation as professionals. So I think we need a lot of reassurance. People who are in management at work need a lot of confidence building and reassurance that this is the right thing to do, and that above all, it's doable. So your book, I think, is fantastic at showing people how it can be done and that it's not that complicated. The second thing I would recommend is taking the free online course that is offered by McMaster University, continuing education, and it's called Creating Caregiver-Friendly Workplaces. And I co-wrote that course based on the research out of McMaster by Dr. Allison Williams, how to create caregiver-friendly workplaces, beginning with identifying leaders and champions and the leadership of the company, getting everybody fully on board and creating a project. It's a project like any other project that needs to be managed to get people on board, to give them the resources and tools that need to be in place to give working caregivers accommodations that they need in order to keep their employment and not quit and give up because it's too difficult to manage 2 jobs at the same time in 2 different locations. But surprisingly, people are paying a great deal of attention to this social problem today. The problem of how to accommodate employees who are family caregivers. And so people know, we know what to do to create the kinds of workplaces that are going to attract and retain that workforce in an aging society. It's very important that people begin to learn how to do this, and that it gets into the water supply of normal business as usual. That
Yeah.
it's not something, like weird or that this is not a second class of employee. You're not setting up something that is less than. You're addressing something that everybody's dealing with today in today's world. So in the same way that people now recognize that childcare for healthy children needs to be accommodated, we just know that it does in all walks of life. So now it's going to be about seniors, and it's going to be about spouses and children with disabilities too. Anybody with an extraordinary need for care must be accommodated in the workplace too.
When we spoke earlier, Donna, the other day, we were talking a little bit about our different comparisons between the U.S. and Canada in terms of the data around working caregivers. And I think we talked a little bit about 73% in the U.S. of employees are dealing with some type of caregiving issue. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like for Canada?
Yeah. I think the statistic today for Canada is 65%, but that could be low. And it may be that the research is more accurate in the United States. I think we have to assume that the vast majority of the workforce also have care responsibilities at home, particularly within a certain age demographic. So at the stage where you've got employees who are at the age where they are likely to be caring for aging parents, they're going to have care responsibilities. Something that we describe in the book, Caregiver Identity Theory. If you think about your life as a pie, where when everybody's healthy, caregiving for your mom at the beginning, Selma, would be a small piece of the pie. And then you've got, fitness, work, family, holidays, whatever, your whole life.
Yes.
But when caregiving begins to eclipse all of those other areas of your life, and you suddenly are realizing that you actually have a full-time second job because significant number of that 75% are doing more than 20 hours a week of
Yes.
caregiving. So that's almost like a second full-time job. This idea where, you begin by thinking, oh yeah, it's fine, it's normal. but then it's a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And
Yes.
this is the unexpected element or characteristic of caregiving where you suddenly go, I have lost control here of my
Yes.
life. And I no longer have choices. There's no choices. What do you mean go on a holiday? What do you mean buy a new car? What do you
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
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 You realize that the most of the pie now is the caregiving, and
Yeah.
there's just a little sliver of the pie that's your social life.
Yeah.
You don't have much left of that, for sure.
No.
The U.S., we have about 53 million caregivers. What's the Canadian stat? Do you know off the top of your head? I think I saw it in one of your infographics.
8 million.
8 million.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's 8 million now. The new stat came out from Statistics Canada.
Tell you what, anybody in a leadership role in government that's listening to our podcast right now, I want to put a charge out that both our countries could team up with over 60 million people caregiving in North America. We got to work together and do stuff. Canada's doing some amazing things. My hat's off to Canada, and I know America's doing as well, but we've got so much work to do. One last question I'll ask you, and then you can share with our audience how people can find you, because we could talk to you all day, Donna, and we'll have you back, hopefully. I liked your story about you and Dr. White not meeting each other till after your book. Selma and I have been working together on this project for 6 years, and we only met each other twice.
Oh,
And we said the
Yeah.
same thing to each other. I thought you were shorter. I thought you were taller. No. Selma and I used to work together in a pharmaceutical company. She was in corporate legal and I was in corporate HR. And we were friends from then. And we've seen a lot. You mentioned how, women who became pregnant and had delivered a child got fired. We've seen a lot in our day, unfortunately and fortunately,
Yeah.
good and bad things. And you made a great comment about, people are afraid to speak up and say, I'm a
Yeah.
caregiver. For right reasons. I mean, there is data and research out there that shows that there are negative consequences to sharing that with an employer, with a manager. You're coming also at this personally, Donna, with such tremendous personal experience with all your family that you've been involved in caregiving, as well as all the people you've talked to who caregive and work. What's one piece of advice you would give to, let's say, a leader, an HR person, a manager? Let's say managers. Let's say, what piece of advice would you give to a manager, knowing that it's very difficult for someone on your team to tell you their story about about their caregivers? Do you have a tip that they could do maybe to try to make that environment a little bit more friendly, a little bit more safe, so that they could share that story? I'm just curious from your experience.
Personally, I think it's worth beginning by locating a member of the leadership team who is or has been a caregiver
Mhm.
and having that person stand up and introduce the idea that it is safe to talk about this in this workplace from this day going forward.
That's brilliant. That's awesome. That's a great suggestion.
If I am the director of sales and I'm a caregiver and I'm telling you I'm a caregiver and we're going to start talking about this. And if I can do this, if I can be this person, then it's safe. This is a safe space because I'm a leader here. I'm indispensable in the company. They're not going to fire me. And I'm telling you I'm a caregiver. So I think, you need to set the tone of safety in conversation about this topic and say that from this day on, we are going to be committed to trying to keep you, our talented workforce, with an understanding that we're going to work together to find the accommodations you need. We want loyalty and commitment because we know you have that to your family, but we know you have it to your workplace as well.
That is an awesome suggestion, Donna. Selma and I have experienced that there are leaders out there that have come forward and have talked about their experience and how that has really opened up the culture. Like we have a chapter, right? There's a caregiver in the C-suite corner, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
We cannot we're out of time, but we can't thank you enough, Donna, for being here. How can our audience get in touch with you?
Well, you can find me and contact me through my website, which is the Caregiver's Living Room at www.donnathomson.com. And there's no P in Thompson because we're Scottish originally.
And I want to encourage our listeners to also connect with you on LinkedIn. You have incredible posts. You always are sharing great articles about the example you just gave, employers doing good things or employees with challenges and sharing those stories. I mean, we've got to share more stories. I think the more stories we share, the more that will help move this needle. So,
absolutely.
Where can we buy your book, Donna?
Oh, thank you for asking. You can buy it at all online booksellers, and all public libraries have it as well.
Awesome.
and,
Great.
And we'll put those links in our show notes as well, so our listeners can find that easy.
Thank
Donna,
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna.
both so much. Thank you for all you do for working caregivers too.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to catch new episodes of Working Caregivers, the Invisible Employees podcast, every other Tuesday. Please also visit our website, invisibleemployeeadvocates.com, to subscribe to our newsletter, purchase our book, and learn more about how we can help you strengthen your workplace to become more supportive of working caregivers.